This is Steve Zeltzer with WorkWeek Radio, and I'm here with
Crispin Miller.
And Mark, there has been a massive amount of propaganda, information blaming Russia, blaming them for interfering in U.S. election policies and hacking. What's going on and what's behind this?
Well, it certainly looks and feels like a preparation for a war with Russia. This whole propaganda spectacle of Putin as the captain of a rogue state intent on world domination or resurgence on the world stage is staggering for its dishonesty, for its falseness, for its projectivity, because in fact Putin is only responding to an ever-intensifying encirclement and confrontation of Russia by the United States. The narrative of Putin gratuitously invading Ukraine, for example, leaves out the crucial fact that the United States essentially struck the first blow by engineering a coup in Kiev a few years ago that ousted the democratically elected president of that country in favor of a junta comprising neoliberal technocrats and outright neo-Nazis that have run the country ever since, steered it toward austerity measures, pushed fracking in the countryside, which was one of the reasons for the resistance put up by the people of East Ukraine. It's a very complicated situation, but the crucial fact here is the fact that the United States mounted a coup in Ukraine that's part of a general program of getting up into Putin's face, I think with an eye toward eventual regime change there. And everything else we're hearing about Putin is part of that plan, his seizure of Crimea. Well, he didn't seize Crimea. They held a referendum there. The vast majority of the people there voted to stay with Russia rather than go with Europe and its economic program. A completely understandable vote in light of the fact that the government of Ukraine next door now was dominated by neo-Nazis. The Russians have, vivid and painful memories of their experience fighting the Nazis. They lost at least 20 million people in that war. So the fact that the majority of the people of Crimea would elect to go with the government of Russia makes sense. There are also understandable economic reasons why they would do that. There is no evidence that they were coerced into voting as they did. So there was an annexation, not a seizure. These are just a couple of examples of a narrative that's dangerously false and may have horrific consequences if we don't contradict it.
Now, you talked in the past about this period that we're going to, in some ways similar to the 50s, when you had the Soviet Union, which again was portrayed as the enemy. It was taking over the United States at that time. The parallels between the witch hunts in the 50s, the kind of hysteria that was created, and today, are there parallels and similarities to it?
Yeah, it sounds terrifyingly like that again, and not only is it terrifying, but it's baffling, because Russia is not a communist country. My son, who's 15 and an intelligent kid, was staggered to learn that Russia is not a communist country. That's partly a reflection on the school system, unfortunately. But I think he responded to a familiar refrain that this is the Red Menace, but it's not red anymore. United Russia is a pretty conservative. That's Putin's party, has a pretty conservative program in many ways.
Would this be inter-imperialist rivalry?
Well, I don't know if I would call it that, because I don't see any evidence that Russia is imperialistic. I think it's what it is the sign of the thrashings of a rogue state, the United States, and an unprecedented imperial power to assert its prerogative at a moment when its power seems to be slipping. You know, we're now up against not just Russia, but Russia and China and Iran and lately Turkey as well. All right. In other words, what seems to be happening is that something like the old face-off between the West and the East, right, between the United States and its allies and the Soviet Union and its satellites, is emerging again in response to American aggression and infiltration. It doesn't seem to me possible that the United States can really succeed in besting an alliance that huge on the other side of the world. And I have a feeling that a lot of other countries are going to become increasingly uneasy at the possible outcome from such a rash and indefensible wave of aggression.
Now, you've talked about the fact that how you have been targeted as a Russian agent. I mean, Stephen Cohn has been attacked. Anyone who seems to be critical of the American government's agenda and ideological framework that they're putting forward is being challenged and attacked. What happened to you and your experience with raising some critique of American propaganda, American policy?
Well, as of this moment, I can't say I've been called a Russian agent. That hasn't happened yet. Stephen Cohen, you know, a great historian of the Soviet Union, is accused of being soft on Putin. He's undeterred, I mean, and he knows his stuff. I've been attacked as a conspiracy theorist. That's the label that's used to marginalize me and to discredit me. And recently, I was the object of an attempt by Vice magazine to make a story out of my employment at New York University, clearly with an eye toward getting me fired. Their claim was that I'm using the classroom as the forum to spread the belief that 9/11 was an inside job, or that the Bush administration had advanced knowledge and deliberately did nothing to stop the attacks. I don't actually use the classroom to spread any belief.
Why would Vice feel that they had to target you for supposed theories that they disagreed with?
Well, that's a very touching question. I mean, Vice is an interesting case because Vice very carefully and successfully cultivates an audience of young people. It's edgy, it's hip, they do a lot of stuff online. They do a lot of stories, soft stories that have, you know, appeal to young kids, millennials. They also have a lot of really good journalists working for them, so they have a certain amount of legitimacy. Jason Leopold is a terrific reporter on national security. Molly Crabapple reports on student debt. These are legitimate subjects, and they have great people working on them. At the same time, I think Vice is also one instrument in this sort of ongoing propaganda war on people who raise critical questions about a number of key propaganda narratives that the United States government has used to keep the war on terror going and so otherwise promote its agenda. And Vice has been particularly vicious and pointed in going after the 9/11 truth movement.
Why is that?
Well, I can only guess that it has to do with some kind of arrangement at the top. Vice is owned by Rupert Murdock, who has, you know, put all of his media properties in one way or the other at the service of state interests. Just to make my case so it doesn't sound like I'm conspiracy theorizing, just before the recent 15th anniversary of 9/11, Vice fired a preemptive shot with an editorial, sneering at 9/11 truth people as demented and crazy and, you know, out of touch with reality and endangering the Republic and so on. Then there was a 2-day symposium on 9/11 at Cooper Union in New York. I was honored to MC the first day. I was contacted by a Vice reporter named Alex Thompson and asked for an interview at the event. I looked up his stuff. He's written a lot on politics. It's really pretty good. I met with him. I said, I know where Vice stands on this, so I'm hoping that you don't take this opportunity just to deride me as a crank. He said, I have no interest in doing that. And then that's exactly what he did. People can look it up online, Alex Thompson. And it includes an interview with me. And he basically cherry-picked as many crazy-sounding statements as he could find that he says were made at the event, so that, again, you came away with the impression that anyone who thinks that 9/11 didn't go down as advertised is insane.
So this was a hack job.
Definitely a hatchet job. Then, this is the most interesting part, about a few weeks later, I got an email from a student in the master's program in NYU's journalism department. I'm not going to give his name, politely asking if we could chat about my perspective on the Bush administration's foreign policy, specifically in regards to terrorism, as well as my experience teaching at NYU. I always say yes to these requests. I was about to do that when I got an email from the chair of my department. "What do you know about this?" was the subject line. And he forwarded to me another email the same kid had sent to his predecessor as chair. The kid thought that this person was chair. In a very different key, a kind of challenging email saying he wanted to talk to her about the fact that I was spreading these fringe views in the classroom, and was it appropriate for the university to employ someone like this? I wrote back to him. I said, you obviously have an agenda that you didn't represent to me. I had done a search on him, and indeed he writes for Vice. He is also a master's student in the journalism department, but he's a Vice reporter, clearly trying to curry favor with his editors, or perhaps they asked him to do this. I don't know how it went down, but I said, I'm not going to talk to you. And then he wrote to me a week later, said that I was right in part. I don't know what part I was wrong about, and that he really did want to do a good job on this, and blah, blah, blah. I ignored it. And then it turned out he was stalking my students outside the classroom. They let me know that he was asking them leading questions about my fringe views, and was I not.
He was a political operative, you think, for Vice?
I think he was an ambitious young reporter for Vice, and has his career in mind. That's what I believe. He writes for Vice Sports, and maybe wants to break into, doing the straight news. I don't really know, but let me say that he seemed to be particularly concerned in talking to the students, or particularly interested in whether millennials generally were more skeptical about the 9/11 narrative. And this is significant because I concluded my opening remarks at the symposium a few weeks before by making the point that younger people now are less intimidated by the conspiracy theory label and are less inclined to buy official narratives because of the internet, which I believe to be true. And it does appear to be the case that Vice is at the service of an attempt to get young people back on the reservation. See? I mean, if you put it all together, that's what it looks like. And I contacted the chair of the journalism department because this is highly unethical. He's stalking students. And the long and short of it is that he's doing something else now, at least for that class. He couldn't come up with anything from the students to use against me. I can't pretend that this is, this amounts to anything terribly serious, because I know people who've paid much higher prices for their, intellectual independence, for their bravery. I'm a tenured professor, so at least until there's some kind of a war emergency, I think I'm safe. But
Do you think there's a danger of that in this country right now with what's going on?
yes, I do. I think that as we speak now, a couple of weeks before Election Day, and as we are hearing increasingly about the possibility of violence by Trump supporters on Election Day, and about the fact that the Russians hacked the DNC and may hack the election system. I'm using the word fact ironically there. These two propaganda drives, these two complementary propaganda drives, seem to me to be laying the groundwork for some kind of crackdown in the event of some sort of violent upsurge on election day or after the election. I hope I'm wrong, I dearly want events to prove me wrong, but this is what it feels like to me. And if there is an attempt to turn, Russia into the target of an American attack, we may be back in 1917. We may be back in the days when Congress passed the Espionage Act. Woodrow Wilson threw Eugene Debs in prison because that kind of dissidence would interfere with an attempt to save the world for democracy. It's feeling like that again, and it would be 100 years since, Yeah,
100 years after the Russian Revolution, right. And on this 100th anniversary we're going into, Russia is now the big enemy, the threat to America. And everything that we have in America. Russia is that threat. Now, the idea of conspiracy theories haven't the United States and other imperialist countries, for that matter, created conspiracies, the Gulf of Tonkin, and incidents in which to go to war, which turn out to be fabrications? I mean, isn't that part of the history of the world?
Well, absolutely it is. I mean, that question answers itself. I mean, the very prevalence of the term conspiracy theory is the result of an extremely ingenious propaganda drive by the CIA, mounted in 1967 to discredit critics of the Warren Report. And you're absolutely right. I mean, the CIA is a conspiratorial organization. Its founders actually conceived their mission as fighting fire with fire. It was their belief that, the Soviet Union had asserted itself and taken over the left, throughout the world, and was attempting to impose its will on the whole globe through conspiratorial means, and that the CIA therefore had to be prepared to resort to the same tactics in order to fight this threat, okay? And in that spirit, they have mounted conspiracy after conspiracy after conspiracy ever since, toppling democratically elected governments all over the world, and doing a great deal here at home, in violation of its alleged charter. I say alleged because it's a classified charter, against operating on American soil. It is a conspiratorial organization. They work through devious and covert means to promote the interests of the state and American business corporations. So to accuse people of conspiracy theory for daring to question those realities is an exquisitely perverse move on their part, and it's one that's succeeded because most of us feel defensive when we harbor suspicions of conspiracy. We feel we have to assure the world that we're not conspiracy theorists, that we're not crazy.
Well, the critics of Obama or critics of Trump on the left, have they fallen for this argument that we've got to stop the conspiracy theories, or the people who raise the issue of conspiracies by the U.S. government themselves are questionable?
Yeah, I would say that the left has long since been compromised.
Why is that?
Well, I assume, and this is based on a fair amount of study, that the left has been deliberately compromised by the CIA in this country, as it has all over the world. I mean, you read a book like Philip Agee's Inside the Company. It's a classic memoir of CIA activities in South America over 10 years in the 60s, which even CIA officials have grudgingly called one of the best books on how the CIA operates. You can see that they had liberal journalists on the payroll. This is not something, it shouldn't even be a controversial claim. It's controversial only to the extent that I'm saying that the American left has been subjected to the same approach, The fact is, if you compare what publications like The Nation and the New York Review of Books and other leftist journals published in the 70s with what they publish now, you compare the subjects they dealt with back then with the subjects they deal with now, I think you'll find a general move away from reporting on things like CIA activities. They don't ever bring it up anymore. It was in the 70s for about 4 years, from about 1973 to 77, that the press began to look into the CIA's involvement with the U.S. media. This sort of culminated in an important, although imperfect, cover story in Rolling Stone by Carl Bernstein in the fall of 1977 called "The CIA in the Media," based on stuff from CIA sources, which revealed that the CIA had over 400 journalists, American journalists, on the payroll. Had. So Bernstein's telling us that had stopped. So the piece was kind of a limited hangout in the sense that what it revealed was shocking enough, but it was actually a way to keep from telling the whole story, because he also made the case that the CIA used journalists for espionage purposes, not propaganda purposes. Well, it's true that they did use them for espionage purposes, but the far graver danger lay in the fact that American journalists were pumping out propaganda that came from the CIA that was approved by the CIA. Nevertheless, the article was valuable. It led to a 3-part series in the New York Times itself a few months later, which was actually quite good. All that in turn led to some congressional hearings, and ever since then, nothing on the subject. Nothing. Wait a second. Which either means that they stopped doing it, or that they succeeded in suppressing the whole discussion, and I think that the latter is the case, and that the toothlessness of our left press, their tendency to ridicule people who are still concerned about the Kennedy assassination, their refusal to talk about 9/11, their dismissal of election fraud as a grave danger. All of this is evidence that the left press in particular has, to answer your question, bought the whole conspiracy theory mythology and have been incapacitated by it.
I mean, have you been interviewed in Democracy Now! And this whole Putinization of the election and the enemy, has that been challenged by Democracy Now! And other left media sources?
Well, Stephen Cohen has been a guest on Democracy Now! And has had some opportunity to, make a sensible case there. In one of his appearances, or maybe even 2 of them, concerning Ukraine, he was on there with somebody from the other side. And I actually asked Amy Goodman about this. It struck me as improper. I'm all for legitimate debate between people who disagree, but I think that when it comes to, governments that are installed through U.S.-backed coups, that, maybe you want to be careful about having people come on and represent themselves as disinterested experts. So what I'm saying is, Cohen has been on Democracy Now!, he has talked about it, he has made his case there, and Democracy Now! Is to be applauded for that. I have been on Democracy Now! A few times in the past, talk about election fraud, and I'm grateful for those opportunities. I do think, though, that for the most part, Amy is not interested in that subject. The requests have been infrequent and the appearances brief.
This Putinization, how Putin is the devil, as the Hitler, it seems to me that that's a very important issue for the American working people about what's happening in our country and what the view of the government is about the threats that they see.
Well, I have to say that, beyond Amy's interviews with Stephen Cohen, she has often been done shows highly critical of Putin. She has treated Pussy Riot as a heroic band of dissidents, although they're supported by the American government. Nobody seems to know this, but Pussy Riot was arrested for indecent activities in a Moscow church. You can go online and see what they were doing. They were stark naked and sodomizing each other right at the front of the church. This wouldn't have gone down very well in Brooklyn, I can imagine they would have been arrested there too, right? This is a deliberate provocation set up so that they would be arrested and that could then pose as righteous dissidents groaning under the iron heel of Vladimir Putin. They even were included playing themselves, cameo roles in an episode of House of Cards, you see? So there we have a kind of estimable leftist radio TV show, Democracy Now!, giving serious attention to a group whose function is a propaganda function for the American government, and in that regard is really no different from House of Cards in its worst season, which has a Putin-based character who's just another devil caricature.
Now, the shows, some of the TV shows and movies, are challenging the ideological framework of the U.S. government and the role of the CIA, the role of spy agencies. Does that give you heart that not everybody has been taken in by this anti-Russian propaganda at this point?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the exceptions to the kind of nationalist narrative, to the pious depiction of CIA power, are really important and very heartening. Not least because they tend to be really excellent works as drama, like Kill the Messenger, Michael Cuesta's film about Gary Webb. Great movie, only played for a week in American theaters. Roman Polanski's The Ghostwriter, which is about Britain, not the United States, really terrific movie. Only played for a week in the United States.
What about the Snowden movie?
Yeah, I haven't seen it. I hear it's very good. I'm looking forward to that. In one way or another, these films sort of in the tradition of JFK, which was sort of like the Tom Paine's Common Sense of movies, when it came to, putting that pivotal moment in the spotlight where it really should have been all along. And on TV all the time, shows like Scandal that broach forbidden subjects that even our journalists won't touch. All of this is really remarkable and positive, and it tells us that those of us who deal with this threat directly and talk about it in a non-fictional way are not really the only ones who are concerned about what's going on, or the only ones who are responding. And more importantly, it tells us that while many people in this country may on the one hand be uneasy about the suggestions of conspiracy and resist it and deny it and tell themselves it can't happen here, that kind of denial goes on with one part of their minds in a way. With another part of their minds, they're able to entertain the possibility that it's all true. The question is how to bring that suspicion, that intuition, into a different part of the brain, and allow them to overcome their misgivings and, recognize what's happening with their own eyes. Younger people are likelier to do that, it seems to me, partly because their opportunities are so much more limited than those of their predecessors, that they're economically screwed and their prospects are bleak, and they're feeling this.
They're very frustrated about their future, if they have any future in the society.
Well, they're very frustrated about it. And, it reminds us what happened in the 30s during the Depression, when the evidence, how can I put this? You're told things, the propaganda is thick, the air is thick with it, and it's assuring you that everything's fine and you can make it and there's no way like the American way. When the palpable evidence of your own senses completely contradicts that claim, when you can see with your own eyes how wrong that is, it tends to destroy the propaganda. The propaganda just collapses. And we're living in a moment somewhat like that now,
Well, those are many of the people who supported Bernie Sanders, who feel that they don't have hope or future the way the structure is now, as far as them getting a free college education or getting a good job. Where's Bernie Sanders in all this?
Bernie Sanders has decided, for whatever reason, to bite the bullet and urge people to support Hillary Clinton. His thinking is that since no third-party candidate has a chance, his thinking seems to be that since Jill Stein doesn't have a prayer, we might as well make sure that Trump doesn't win and then do everything we can to fight Hillary. I don't think that, I think that's an unrealistic step to take. I respect the argument. I don't think Trump could ever win. I think that even if Trump were actually to earn a plurality of votes, which is unlikely enough, even if he were able to do that, the interests backing Hillary Clinton will not allow him to be elected president. They're the same interests that pushed Bush-Cheney on us. They include the Bush family, but it's the Pentagon, the CIA, the military-industrial complex, Big Pharma, Big Oil, AIPAC, Wall Street, the neocons. I mean, they're going to sit back and let Trump be elected because he's the people's choice. I mean, that's a ridiculous idea. If Trump were president, let me make this clear, I don't believe that American policy would be fundamentally any different. I think he'd get the message, because he doesn't want to have his head blown off in an open car. He would do as ordered. But with Trump in the White House, any of these measures that they have in mind will rouse tremendous mass resistance because he's so polarizing and hated a figure, right? A little bit like Bush. When Bush the second, when Bush was president, it mobilized a tremendous number of Democrats against him for doing things that they should have disapproved of. Obama comes in, and Obama does things that are much worse than what Bush did, and all those Democrats are fast asleep. Our guy is doing it, right? He's our first black president, so he can make 5 new wars and so on. I think the thinking is that they need to keep that going by giving us our first woman president. Our first woman president will then have a similarly free hand to start more wars, to push more austerity measures, to crack down further on civil liberties, right? And then the majority, which tends to be, actually pretty progressive, more progressive than people think they are, will, many of them will stay asleep. I actually believe, though, that it's not going to work so well this time, because Hillary Clinton is no Barack Obama. Barack Obama has a tremendous amount of political skill. In this way, he's like Bill Clinton. He's disarming, he's charming, and so on. Hillary isn't. Hillary doesn't have any of those political gifts. And by now it isn't only the troglodytes of the right who hate her because she's a woman, right? It's a lot of people who are appalled by her fealty to Wall Street, by her warlike policies, her keen appetite for regime change.
She kind of loved that killing of Gaddafi. It was just personal. It's wonderful. We just killed this guy.
We came, we saw, he died. She laughs in delight after saying this. It's one of the most frightening things I've ever seen. People should also know about the moment when she was giving a speech in New York City, deploring crackdown on civil liberties in Egypt, I think it was, and the importance of honoring dissent, etc. When Ray McGovern stood up in front of her and took off his shirt, he was wearing a T-shirt with some kind of protest slogan on it. And as she's standing there talking about the need to respect dissent, 2 or 3 goons attack this guy, 71 years old, and basically beat him up and hustle him out, and she doesn't even stop reading the text. So it's on video. In fact, Amy Goodman did a show on it with McGovern as a guest, with a black eye, big bruise on his arm. It's another piece of video evidence of the fact that Donald Trump is not the only sociopath in this contest.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us on WorkWeek Radio. I think this is obviously going to be an ongoing issue of political debate in the United States about the future of this country.
Oh, absolutely, and it's a debate we have to have, and we can't be intimidated into dropping out of it.